Welcome back to another lesson in Unit 7 of the iGCSE Computer Science syllabus. This unit is all about algorithm design and problem solving, and so far we've looked at the key concepts when it comes to breaking down a problem, which means to decompose it, abstract the information that we need in order to solve a problem, and we've looked at some of the basic steps on how to create a flowchart in order to visualize a sequence of steps, or better known as an algorithm. Today will be very similar, and we're going to be looking at this term pseudocode, which also visualizes an algorithm, but ties in with exactly what we've been doing so far in Unit 7, which is all about problem solving. So the syllabus topics are the same as the previous two lessons, and it ties in with the methods of designing and constructing a solution to a problem. So as we've mentioned, the three things that we need to be able to read and create are structure diagrams, flowcharts, and finally pseudocode, which is today's lesson. So if you need to go back and watch the video on structure diagrams and flowcharts, that was in lesson 2, where I explained how these are created and the basics behind them. So in this lesson, I'm going to treat pseudocode as if you have absolutely no knowledge of programming whatsoever, because what this topic leads into is the ability to read and write high-level programming languages such as Python. So being able to read pseudocode and write pseudocode will give you a good start into your coding and programming journey, and will just help you understand some of the basics and fundamental programming concepts that you need to know in the bigger world of programming. So pseudocode does the same thing as a flowchart, in that it demonstrates an algorithm, a sequence of instructions or steps. But what it does, rather than using shapes like a flowchart, it uses English keywords that are very similar to the words that are used in a language such as Python. So again, I'm going to treat this like you've never seen a programming language before. And this term syntax is all of the rules that apply to programming languages, which can be quite tricky to learn, and is the reason why pseudocode is used in the design of a solution, so that we take the pseudocode design and then go into our programming language and then use a programming language to create the actual software on the computer. But what is important with pseudocode is that we remain consistent, so that not only you can read it, but other people can read it as well. Now, in terms of what we need to produce, there are certain rules which we will go over in terms of what the exam board are looking for in pseudocode, and you will see plenty of examples. You'll get used to what is expected in terms of pseudocode, and I'll cover the absolute basics that we need to know in terms of pseudocode. So what you'll find throughout the course, in my lessons, in past papers, and generally the resources available, you'll find that pseudocode is written in a similar font throughout. So a standard font is used to write pseudocode. And again, you'll get used to this the more that we see it. Something else, that keywords such as input will always be written in capital letters. So input, output, if, all of the keywords that we're going to learn, in pseudocode, you put these in capital letters. When it comes to variables or data items and subroutines, these start with a capital letter, but then the remainder of the word will be in lowercase. So for example, if you've got a variable called name, it'll be capital M followed by AME in lowercase. And again, you'll get used to this the more that we see it. Whenever we use a conditional or a loop statement, so an if or a loop statement, we use this term indentation, which can be quite tricky, but again, we'll practice this and become familiar with it. But they're the basics, guys. You will get full marks by using these rules in pseudocode questions. But if you make a mistake and forget to put a capital letter on a variable, for example, it's not the end of the world. And as long as your algorithms make sense, then you should still be okay. So the first thing we're going to look at is assignment, and assigning a value to what we call a variable. So a variable is a word that stores a piece of data and stores some kind of information. So here you can see, this is our first look at pseudocode, and you can see the same font is being used throughout, very different to the one I've used in this PowerPoint. Now on the left-hand side, you can see all of these here are called variables. So we've got cost, price, tax, selling price, gender, and chosen. These are all variables because they store data about something. So to create a variable and put a value inside, all you need to do is write the name of it by giving it a meaningful name. So a word that describes what it's going to store. For example, cost is going to store the cost of something. It's followed by an arrow and then the data that goes inside of this variable. So it's a variable name, an arrow, and then the data that goes in. So in this first line, cost is given the value 10, and then price, which is another variable, is given the value of cost times 2. So cost is 10 from previous, multiplied by 2, so that equals 20, and 20 is put into the price variable. So price has the value 20. Tax is set to the value of price times 0.12, So price is currently 20 times 0.12, and that equals 2.4. So 2.4 is put inside the tax variable. Selling price is price plus tax. So price has the value of 20, tax has the value of 2.4. We add them together, and the value is put inside of selling price. Again, using the arrow, and the value is stored inside the variable selling price. Finally, gender is given the letter M, and chosen is set to false. Now, these two refer to two data types that we call a string and Boolean, and this will be discussed later on in the course when we look at types of data used throughout programming. So don't worry for now, we're just getting used to pseudocode, so don't stress too much about the types of data that go inside what we call variables. The most important thing here is the assignment, which is the arrow. Next, we come to this term operators. Now, these are the different functions that we can use when it comes to performing maths or comparisons on variables or data. So obviously you recognize or should recognize these four: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. If you weren't familiar with multiply and divide, we've got an asterisk and a forward slash. We can also use this upwards facing arrow for raise to the power. So 2 to the power of 2 would be the same as writing this. And brackets or a group is the same as brackets in maths. So 2 plus 2 times 10 would be 4 times 10, which equals 40. So that's not too difficult to understand. Greater than, less than, equal to. You should be familiar with them. So you should know that 4 is more than 1, for example. Or you can combine it with the equal sign to say it's greater than or equal to. Same for less than. And if you ever get mixed up with these, you can use the hungry crocodile approach. So the hungry crocodile eats the bigger number. So 1 is smaller than 4, so it eats the bigger number. But what I prefer to do is just raise my left hand, create an L, like a loser sign, slightly tilt my hand so that I'm creating one of the arrows. And as you can see, the L is closer to the less than sign, and L is your left hand. So your left hand equals less than. So hopefully that makes sense, but that's my way of remembering. Not equal to are the less than and bigger than signs. So anyone who is familiar with programming would know that this is not equal to. In terms of pseudocode, it would be this one here. And then finally, and or a not allows us to combine conditions and check for multiple scenarios, meaning either all have to be true, one or the other can be true, or they can't be true. And we'll see many examples, guys, of these operators as we move forward. But these are all the operators that we need to know. And again, we'll be covering these throughout the course. Next, we have the term input and output. So the word input is a keyword, hence why it's in capitals. And as you can see, input is followed by the name of a variable. So input is an indication that data is going to be entered and stored. So here, input name means we're going to put data in and store it in the variable name. So name is a variable, and it's going to contain something that we enter. Next, we have another input, which is followed by student mark. So again, we're going to enter data into this variable using the input keyword. So two variables are created, name and student mark, and data is put inside. So if I put in the name Bob and the student mark of 75, I then use the output keyword, which will simply write out the text that follows it using the variable, some text, another variable, and then more text. So what this algorithm would output when it's ran is Bob scored 75 in his final exam. And those who are familiar with programming will recognize this in terms of print statements, and input is the same word in most programming languages. But in terms of pseudocode, input and output are our keywords, and this is what they are used for. And as always, some questions for us to finish off. So if you want to, pause the video, give these questions a go, and then I will follow up with the solutions. So question 1, what will be the value of x after the following pseudocode executes? Well, x is set to 10, so we store the number 10 in the variable x. We then add 5 to x, and then store the answer, overwriting what was originally in x, meaning that x equals 15. Question 2, what does the following pseudocode do? Well, it creates a variable called name and stores the string Alice. So it simply stores the name Alice in the variable name, and the variable age contains the number 25, which is an integer. So nice and simple, two variables are created and store the values Alice and 25. Identify the mistake in the following assignment statement. Well, as you can see, the variable name should be on the left with an arrow towards it and then the data that goes inside. So it should be x is set to 5. What will be the value of y after executing the following pseudocode? Well, x is set to 8, so 8 is put into the variable x. Then y becomes x multiplied by 2. So x is currently 8, multiplied by 2 is 16, and 16 is put into y, so y would equal 16. And then finally, if a is set to 5 and b is set to 2, what will c be after the following statement? So c becomes a to the power of b, so it's 5 to the power of 2, which simply equals 5 times 5, which equals 25. So C contains 25. And that concludes our first lesson on pseudocode, where we have covered the assignment statements, the operators, and the terms input and output when it comes to inputting data into a variable. So as always, I hope you've managed to follow along. In the next lesson, we are going to look at selection and the use of if and case statements. So we're going to take our pseudocode skills just up a level. But as always, I will break it down and we will take a slow approach to it and make sure that we understand the key concepts so that we are setting ourselves up for success when it comes to programming. Okay, guys, so I'll hopefully see you in the next lesson.